Yes, yes, yes. Hello and welcome. We are waiting for the stream to fire up. We are simulcasting as usual on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Periscope. And it looks like we are online. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Watching the Watchers Live. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney in Scottsdale, Arizona. We help good people charged with crime. We've represented literally thousands of people. And in the course of our practice, we have seen many police officers doing bad things. This has sort of been the moment du jour for many people across the country and across the world, this enlightenment. People are seeing what we are seeing. They're seeing a lot of police misconduct, prosecutorial misconduct, a lot of malfeasance going on in the world. And of course, we want to call that into attention. We want to hold them accountable. We want more transparency. So on this show, what we do is we highlight those things. Any type of misconduct that's going on in our criminal justice system, we want to hold them accountable. We are watching the watchers because there, unfortunately, are a lot of good guys out there. There are a lot of bad guys out there pretending to be good guys, and they're doing it hiding behind a badge and a gun. And it has been only 1 week. We were here 1 week ago, and we have a new case, unfortunately. We have a new black man who was killed by a white police officer. And of course, I am talking about Rayshard Brooks. So today on Watching the Watchers, we're talking about Rayshard Brooks. We're talking about President Trump's presidential action on police reform. And of course, we've got many other things that we're going to talk about. So let's get right into it. What's going on, Yuli? I saw that you said hello. Hey, if you're listening live, do me a favor, drop a comment either on YouTube or on Facebook or on Twitter so that I know that you're there, so that you can hear me loud and clear and we can continue to keep this show on the road. What's going on? Lady Zaga, who is back regular on the channel. And she said that you're a brave man. Well, I don't know. We're going to see. We're going to see where this goes, and hopefully I don't get myself into too much trouble as we discuss this. So Rayshard Brooks, he was shot and killed by a police officer. This happened not too long ago. It's been sort of the story. Rayshard Brooks is right here. He was following another man, following the death of another man. He was shot. He was 27 years old. He was shot on Friday night, June 12th in Atlanta, after he tried to flee from two white police officers. So we have some of the 911 calls, we have some of the videos, but you probably have already seen it thus far. This is a situation that arose when there was a traffic stop. So Rayshard Brooks was going through a Wendy's in Atlanta and he fell asleep in his car. Now, this is something that we see happen all the time. You know, as DUI defense lawyers, this is actually a pretty common thing. It's not unusual for somebody to go on a food run and fall asleep in the car while they're waiting for their order. And so we've represented many people in this type of situation. Most of the time it doesn't end this way, but unfortunately it did. So the cops came up, they knocked on his window because he was blocking other traffic in the drive-through lane, and it went bad. So they actually pulled him out of the car. They patted him down for some weapons, and then they were going to place him under arrest. So they put a portable breath test in his mouth. He blew. Apparently, the blood alcohol content was around a BAC of 0.108, I believe, or 0.0. I'm not sure where it was at, but it was above the legal limit. So they placed him under arrest, and they were going to take him into custody. He did not want to be arrested because of his background. It gets into an altercation. He starts fleeing from the cops. He has a taser from one of the officers. As he is running away, one of the officers pulls out his gun and actually shoots him. I think he fires 3 shots, hit him twice, and ultimately killed him. He's shot. He's laying there in the roadway, and the police are trying to keep him alive. He's transferred to a hospital at a later date, and he is pronounced dead. So this is Rayshard Brooks once again. And just today, we learned that there have been some new developments. But before we get there, let's listen real quickly to the 911 call. Not going to play the whole call because it's not super helpful, other than the fact that the 911 caller, I want you to pay close attention, doesn't really know what's wrong with him, thinks that he may be intoxicated, but also makes a point to say the 911 operator answers the call and is asking multiple times, does he seem dangerous? Do you see any weapons or anything like that? And there's no indication that happened. Let's listen in on the call itself. 911 call.
Hey, Atlanta 911 operator 7729. What's location emergency?
125 University.
Okay, 125 University Southwest. Is it at the Wendy's?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, you need police, fire, ambulance out here.
The police.
Okay, tell me what's going on.
I have a car. I think he's intoxicated. He's in the middle of my drive-thru. I tried to wake him up, but he's parked dead in the middle of the drive-thru, so I don't know what's wrong with him.
Is he breathing now? Do you know?
Yeah, he woke up, looked at me, and I was like, you got to move out of the drive-thru because people can't. They're going around him. He's in the middle of the, just right
All
there.
right. Tell me what kind of car he
So they're trying to go around him.
What's the
and
color
I
of
asked
it?
him to pull over. You know, if he don't have too much to drink, to pull over and go to sleep. He said they said he went right back after I walked in.
What kind of car is it?
It's a white car. He just sitting there. You can't miss me.
Is he black? Is he black? Why is he taking?
Yeah. He black.
Okay, in a white sedan in the middle of the drive-thru.
No, let me see what kind of car. It's right here. He's right here. The car's going around him.
Yeah, so you can see there kind of a pretty standard type of 911 call. Just something's wrong. If you keep listening,
does he appear to have any weapons?
There we go. Yeah, so here we go. Whoop. Let me play that again. Near towards the end.
It's going around him.
Appear to have any weapons, ma'am?
Ma'am?
Does he appear to have any weapons from where you can see him?
No, I think he's intoxicated.
All right, give me your name and callback number.
Okay, so yeah, that came from USA Today. The 911 caller, as Ruth Grant in the comments says, yeah, my understanding is she worked for Wendy's. She's saying, hey, this guy is blocking our drive-thru. Other people can't come through the drive-thru. She went out to go try to wake him up. He didn't wake up. Calls 911, says, hey, we got this problem. This guy's intoxicated or passed out. They send the police out to deal with it. So she tried to go wake him up, couldn't wake him up. Cops come out. 911 operator asks, any weapons that you saw? And she says, no weapons. So no indication that there were any weapons there. You know, this, like I said, it's pretty standard. The police are used to coming to scenes like this. The cops are almost, when they approach, which we're going to see here shortly, they know exactly what's going on. They know this guy has been drinking. It's late. He's just going through Wendy's on a food run. So pretty standard stuff up until that point. And then we get into where things start to go bad. So these two white police officers, who we're going to name here shortly, they approach his car. He had, of course, fallen asleep. He was asked to move his car. So they come in, they wake him up. They say, just pull your car over there. They do administer a field sobriety test. As soon as they're putting his hands behind his back, he starts to fight with them and he breaks free. Then it looks like he actually takes a taser from one of the officers while he's in this altercation. As he's running away, his back is facing the officers. You see him very briefly take that taser and point it back in the officer's direction. It was a taser, not a gun. One of the officers pulls out his gun and fires 3 shots. Of course, 2 of those hit Rayshard and they kill him. Let's take a look.
Hey.
Copy 41 no injury.
Sir.
25 westbound at Jones.
What's up, man?
25 westbound.
Hey, you're parked in the drive-thru right now. Hey, sir. You right?
Party, still black Toyota Camry and an unknown.
Dude, you're parked. You're sitting in the drive-thru line here.
So it's kind of a lot
What's
of
up?
this.
Trying to tell me where you coming from. He said, well, I'm coming from Jonesboro. I got food. I said, what are you doing here? I got more food. So he's really not too clear. Like, I got.
So where's your friend now?
She's at the hotel.
What hotel?
Right here at the Home Lodge.
Where is that? What's the address to it?
I'm not sure. I know she's here at the Home Lodge.
Yeah, these videos are always hard to
So,
watch
how
because
did-
you know that
how did
he's
she
gonna
drop
be
you
dead
off here?
very soon.
She drove here and dropped me off.
In what car?
And a black Volvo.
Yeah, and so he's kind of making some kind of clumsy remarks, right? He says that he got dropped off there, but he's in his car, which, you know, how do you do that? You don't drop a person off in their car, or they dropped him off at the car that was already there, in which case, why is he at a Wendy's? You know, why was his car at a Wendy's? He's trying to come up with an explanation for it. He's obviously intoxicated, and he's just trying to sort of explain his way out of the situation. Of course, the cops are not buying it. You can see the body language kind of seems like he's a little bit annoyed, just kind of going through the motions here, knows what he's there for, knows this is a DUI stop, knows that he's going to put him under arrest. He's just going through the motions. Let's see.
Hey, you mind just putting your phone on the trunk of your car? I don't want you to have anything in your hand. All right.
Okay, so right here.
All right, so no medical conditions, no injuries, no physical defects. Are you comfortable walking in these shoes?
Absolutely. Well, they're brand new. I just bought them.
Can you walk in them without falling, stumbling, anything like that?
Standard field sobriety test.
You walk in them okay?
Remember,
I just bought them.
Remember, you don't have to do these in Arizona and most of a lot of other states. When you're doing these field sobriety tests, all these cops are doing is trying to get evidence against you. It's just giving them more basis to actually put you under arrest. So whether you can refuse these or not, check your local state rules on that, or what your laws are. There may be some additional penalties for refusing them, not in terms of criminal law, but in terms of your driver's license. But in Arizona, you can refuse all of these tests. So Rayshard could have easily refused these tests and didn't. Of course, he's trying to comply. We hear a lot of the language coming from him. Hey, he's basically trying to give himself an out. He's trying to explain why he's going to fail this test. It's not because of the alcohol. It's because of his new shoes, which is, again, it's pretty common, pretty standard DUI stop type of stuff.
Can you walk in okay? You don't have to show me. I'm just asking, are you comfortable walking in the shoes?
I mean, they are comfortable, but...
Okay, so again, this is the HGN test. This is the pen test. What they're looking for are your eyes to be jerking a certain movement. You really can't see how he's performing on this test from this angle. Officer's hand kind of looks a little high to me. Should be a little bit lower. He's looking way up.
Feet. Count your steps out loud so that I can hear them. Keep your hands by your side and don't stop walking until you complete the test.
Walk and turn test. This is another.
Do you have any questions about how to perform the test?
Sobriety test.
No, sir.
All right. Here, get back in the start.
6, 7, 8, 9.
Okay. So the turn is really difficult. The turn gets a lot of people because you're supposed to do a pivot rather than pick your foot up. So you keep one foot planted on the ground, and you turn around one foot. So you like put it as an anchor, like picture like you're putting a nail into the top of your foot, and then you're going to turn around and continue the sequence of steps. These are very hard to do, actually. I've done talks before in front of other audiences, and I'll have them actually try to perform the test. So I'll give them the instructions just like the officer would give them a set of instructions, and I'll have people try to perform the tests, and then I'll have the audience actually grade them. So they'll have the rubric, that the same rubric that the cops use, they'll grade them. And almost everybody fails every time because these are not, we call them roadside agility maneuvers. They're trying to knock you off balance. All they're wanting to do is gather enough probable cause to complete the arrest, which this officer does here shortly.
It's probably about maybe 2 minutes away from here.
Did you over? Haven't drank anything. And 10 being hammered.
Old Dixie Highway.
You're not on Old Dixie Highway.
Well, I'm not on Old Dixie Highway.
What city do you think you're in?
She brought me here.
We have 9 pending, 1 car, 2.
It was yesterday.
Okay, so they're still
It was my
talking.
Here's the money. Take me home. I'm ready to go.
So you had about 1.5 drinks, but you don't remember what kind of drinks they were?
No, sir.
All right. On your back for me?
Here it comes.
Here, put your hands on your back.
Oh, and of course we got an ad.
You're gonna get tased! You're gonna get tased!
Stop! Mr. Ross! Stop! Come on, man.
Stop! You're gonna get tased!
Mr. Ross!
Hands off the fucking taser! Hands off the taser! Hands off the taser! Stop fighting! Got my fucking taser! 63.
3 shots. Yeah, 3 shots, and that was the end of that. If you continue to watch the video, you'll see that the cops actually, it's kind of realize that this was a mistake. I think we can see that. I think we have the next video. Let's run through and see what we've got here.
Witnesses started recording when they saw a struggle between 27-year-old Rayshard Brooks and 2 APD officers.
At some point, Mr. Brooks actually gets the upper hand. That's when he gets up and runs away.
GBI investigators say Brooks also got a hold of one of the officers' tasers. Surveillance video then shows Brooks
okay, so he's swinging now
from the officers as they chased after
taser goes
him.
out, misses him. He's running away.
That looks from the video
there we
that
go.
He has his own taser out and
fires it back.
It seems like he's trying to.
Yeah, and that's when the bullets come out of this officer's gun. So the question then is, if you really were to break that down frame by frame, is the shooting justified? Is the shooting of Rayshard Brooks by this police officer justified? You can see here from this frame, they're far apart from one another, and he's running away from the cop. So we've had a couple different types of arguments pop up. Obviously, this resulted in major catastrophe across the entire city of Atlanta. We saw that the Wendy store got burnt down. The protesters, they ignited Wendy's. They set fire to it. They shut down an interstate highway in both directions. 36 people were arrested by the police following it, and the verdicts are kind of split on this one. So if you've been a regular of the show, you know that we try to analyze these situations according to the law and according to the facts that are presented in front of us. All too often, people jump on a side. You're either pro Black Lives Matter and everything that the cops do is totally wrong and unjustified, or you're on the other side where you're pro-police, you're pro-popo. You love the police and everything they do is justified. And in close call situations like this, everybody just jumps to the side. So we have a lot of people who are former, police officers. We've got a lot of ex-sheriffs and those things saying this was all justified because they were under attack, or they were under attack. He got their taser. Apparently the taser is a deadly instrument now. Or the argument is that when he fires the taser back, he could incapacitate one of the cops and then take their gun and then cause more damage. And so that's one side of the argument. And the other side of the argument, it's, guys, you shot a guy in the back twice who was running away from you. So how could that possibly be a threat on your life? He was literally running away. So those are the two types of arguments that we're going to explore. But let's take a look at some of the law first. So in Georgia, here's what Georgia law says. The use of deadly force. Georgia law allows a person to use deadly force only if he or she reasonably believes that such force is necessary to prevent the death or great bodily injury to himself or herself or a third person. And so this was something that we were analyzing before. We know that there were going to be charges that were going to be released, or they were investigating charges. We now know that the officer who actually did pull the trigger was charged with a whole slew of crimes. We're going to talk about what those are. Let's take a look at the Atlanta Police Manual, though, first. All right. Number one, the Police Atlanta Manual says this: an officer can use deadly force when he or she reasonably believes that the suspect possesses a deadly weapon or any object, device, or instrument which, when used offensively against a person, is likely to or actually does result in serious bodily injury, and when he or she reasonably believes that the suspect poses an immediate threat of serious bodily injury to the officers or others. All right, so just on the face of that, you've got some things to consider. We've got some analysis to do here. First and foremost, was it a deadly weapon? Was the taser a deadly weapon? I think that the answer there is clearly no. It's less than lethal force. We know that tasers can kill people. I have actually been shot by a taser, by the way. I did this in high school when I was a young man. I had a friend whose father was, I think, working for Taser at the time, and this was all after 9/11. He had a taser around his house, and doing something that stupid high school kids do. They said, "Hey, well, let's shoot somebody with it," and so they shot me with it, and it was not a pleasant experience. But I am still alive. I got shot, those two prongs, right in my left butt cheek, and I dropped everything. It was not a pleasant experience. Not one of the finer moments of my life, but it did happen and I'm still alive. It's less than lethal force. So I don't think that it would qualify as a deadly weapon. And I think you could find a number of different police agencies from around the country who would agree with that. They would say, yeah, it's less than lethal. That's why we use it, because it doesn't result in killing people. So if we just said that a taser is not a deadly weapon, I think that kind of gets rid of that argument right from the police policy manual to begin with. The guy was 15 to 20 feet away. He was running away. He was not using a deadly weapon, which would result in serious bodily injury. So let's say it's not a deadly weapon. Let's say it's not a gun. It's not a knife. It's not a bomb. It's not going to be something that is considered a deadly weapon. Well, would it result in serious bodily injury? I mean, that's kind of up for debate, right? I got shot with the taser. It knocked me down for sure, but I was right back up 30 seconds later. So I didn't have any serious bodily injury as a result of it. It's less than lethal, and it's not particularly dangerous. You just you knock somebody down with it and incapacitate them for a short period of time, but you can get up and walk it off. So seriously bodily injury to me reads as a maiming, a broken bone, a fractured skull, lesions, blood, those types of things, not getting electrocuted with a less than lethal weapon. So I think it's outside of the policy manual right there, just on the face of it. Right there, the fact that the officer pulled a gun, which was not a deadly weapon, it was not going to result, the taser, I'm talking about Rayshard Brooks's taser, would not have resulted in seriously injury, and I do not think it is an immediate threat of serious bodily injury to the officer or others, because he was running the other direction. He wasn't running towards them. He was running away from them. And just quite simply, according to the manual, the use of deadly force was not appropriate according to Atlanta's own rules, to their own manual. So here is what we saw happen today. This stuff, as I said, every Wednesday, right before the show starts, we are all prepared for a show, and then the news strikes at about 2 o'clock. We have to go in and sort of revise what we're talking about today. But we do know, in good news, that 2 of the officers who were involved were, in fact, charged with crimes. So we have Officer Devin Brosnan, who was charged with aggravated assault, and we've got Officer Garret Rolfe, who was charged with felony murder. And I think it was like 15 counts of felony murder. So the Atlanta police officer, Devin Brosnan, this gentleman here, he was placed on leave, but Garret Rolfe was actually fired, and the Atlanta police chief, Erica Shields, also resigned. So he was fired, Garret Rolfe was fired, and then Erica Shields resigned in the wake of the incident. So Garret was the one who actually pulled the trigger 3 times, hit him twice in the back, and then Devin was the one who's on administrative leave. So the question that I thought was, well, why did he get charged? Why did the non-shooter get charged with a crime? And the answer was because when he went over to Rayshard, who was on the ground, my understanding is he admits that he stood on his shoulders. So he was actually continuing to try to incapacitate him. A guy who had already been shot twice, he goes over, stands on his shoulders. He's trying to incapacitate him further and round up the whole situation. So that was something that makes sense to me, but I didn't realize that had happened because we had not seen that. So here's what the law says, right? Felony murder is what Rolfe has been charged with. Actually, he's been charged with 11 counts of felony murder, 11 counts of that. So the possibility of life without parole, possibility of death, of a death sentence. He's been charged on several counts of aggravated assault, 7 violations of violating the oath of office. Each one of those carries a sentence of 1 to 5 years. And then he's got another count for actually kicking Rayshard Brooks as he is laying on the ground dying, which again, I did not see that, but apparently there is more evidence that just has not made it yet. So Brosnan faces 3 charges for aggravated assault, but he did actually agree to testify. So if we go back, Brosnan was the one who stood on his shoulders. He is agreeing to testify. He is helping. He is testifying against Officer Rolfe. He's basically turning into a state witness. So this guy is now realizing that that this whole thing went very bad, and he's trying to save his own skin. Aggravated assault carries up to 20 years in prison. Violation of oath of office, again, are 1 to 5 years. Failure to administer medical assistance timely. Brosnan, the officer who stood on the guy's shoulders, admitted to standing on the shoulders, and he also acknowledges that that is an unauthorized control technique. Unauthorized control technique, but did it anyways. Both men's have to turn themselves in by tomorrow at 6 p.m. So both of those guys have now been charged with a crime. Let's take a look at the statutes, shall we? Felony murder. What we're typically talking about here is this subsection here. A person commits the offense of murder when, in the commission of a felony, he causes the death of another human being, irrespective of malice, right? So if you remember, this was our bank example. Like if you are robbing a bank with a group of guys and you're the getaway driver, and the guys who go into the bank and rob the bank, if they kill the teller, you're responsible for that teller's murder, even though you're sitting in the car. It's felony murder. You were in the process of committing a felony, and somebody died in that process. Therefore, the murder gets hung on you just as much as the person who did the shooting. And that's typically relevant in these types of cases. It's when a cop is violating their policy, when they're doing something out of a manual, outside of what's authorized according to their Atlanta Police Manual. They are now committing a felony. If he's shooting somebody, that's a felony. And some people are going to be saying that this should be sort of unintentional murder, right? So when he unlawfully and with malice aforethought, the part of the statute here that we're talking about is you wanted to murder somebody. You had malice aforethought. You had malice in your mind. You had the intention of actually killing a human being, and you thought about it beforehand. This was what you woke up to do. It's either express or implied, and you caused the death of a human being. So there's some good argument that one applies also, that he, when I first watched this video, it reminded me of growing up with my younger brothers. So I'm the oldest of 3 boys. You may have siblings of your own. And so think about it this way, right? Let's say you're the oldest or the youngest, it doesn't really matter, but you get into a fight with your siblings. I am the oldest. I'm used to winning and beating up on my younger brothers. There were occasions, very rarely, and I don't like to admit this publicly, where my younger brother or brothers would best me. They would get the better of me in a certain type of case, a certain type of situation. Sports, karate, games, video games, board games, whatever it is. Talking about as young men. I get bested by my younger brother. My younger brother would typically run away when he knew that he just beat his older brother. He would know he's in trouble. And you may, have something like this in your own life where when you've bested somebody and it's kind of like, oh man, they're going to be so mad when I just slam dunk right in their face. They're going to be very upset about that. And so as you're slamming that ball into the dunk, as you're just gloating over this, you run away. So my little brother would come in and he would win. He would do something and he would just flee. He would just run out of the room because he knew that a wrath was coming. And what I would do is I'd be so mad that I'd just pick up something and throw it at him or throw it in that general direction. Dang it! And just and throw something in his general vicinity. That's kind of what this felt like to me. Obviously to a much more serious level, right? With my brother, he gets hit in the back of the head with a video game controller or something. It's painful, but he's going to survive and he'll be fine. But this is what happened here. I mean, this is how I saw it. When I saw that this altercation occurred, we had these 2 white cops get into this altercation with Rayshard, and he bests both of them quickly and clearly. I mean, they both have the jump on him. They both grab an arm. He wrangles free, pops one of them. He's fighting back with one of them, and they get embarrassed. They get totally blindsided. There's 2 of them. This guy just got the jump on them. Not only that, he grabbed their taser. He actually took their weapon from them and started running away. So he just mopped the floor with these two cops, and they were not happy about it. Part of the reason I was talking about the body language earlier, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. I don't like to play a lot of other videos on this channel, but when you watch that cop, he is highly annoyed. That Officer Rolfe, he's irritated to be there, and cops do this all the time. They get very frustrated. They want people to be upfront with them. The cop there wanted him to say, yeah, man, I'm drunk. I've been drinking and driving, and I'm drunk, and I shouldn't be on the road. So the cop just goes, cool, my work here is done. Get in the car. We're going to take you down to the station. We're going to process you and release you. But no, this cop has to go through this whole process. They got to come out there. They got to wake him up. They got to give him all these stupid tests. They know he's drunk. They're going through the motions because this is what they have to do because of defense lawyers like us. And then boom, the situation goes bad. Then he starts running away. The cops have just totally gotten embarrassed by this guy. He just whooped both of them. They're both on the ground. He takes their taser from them, and he's running away. He's going to get away because he got the drop on both of them. So the cop did like I did with my younger brother, and he picked up something to throw at him, and it was his firearm, and he decided, I am not going to let this stand. Now, there's more coming out from the story that I just read. I didn't have time to include here specifically. But apparently one of the big factors as to why they charged him with murder is because at some point he says that I got him. So as Rayshard is running away, the officer who pulled the trigger says, I got him. Pulls out the gun, boom, boom, boom. Fires those 3 shots, and Rayshard goes down. And to me, it was nothing more than he got embarrassed and he was angry about it. He's a young cop. And he just wanted to end the situation. He just got whooped, and now he was gonna say, okay, cool, we'll see. We're gonna play it back, and we're gonna see, how this works. And he fired his gun, and he killed the guy who was running away from him. Here is the story from the Fulton County District Attorney, Paul Howard. So the district attorney is going to be the guy who decides whether or not to charge the officers, charge the crimes. And that's this gentleman here, Paul Howard. Howard said that Brooks presented, so this is the guy who just filed the charges or just announced that the charges were coming today. Howard said that Brooks presented no threat to the officers who knew that the taser had been stolen. It had been deployed twice, and therefore it was rendered useless, which is another great point, right? When you fire a taser, it's got these little cartridges that go on the top. And inside each one of those cartridges, it's like a casing for a bullet. But essentially, it explodes open. You have these 2 pins that jump out at you, and they stick into you. They've got these little barbs on the end of it. And once that's been fired, it's fired. You don't get to wheel back in those little pins and like a fishing rod. You don't get to shove them back in there. You have to take off that whole clip, toss it, put a new one on, and now your taser is functional again. So did Rayshard have did he swap those out? I mean, he's already discharged at some point. So even if you thought it was a deadly weapon, or even if you wanted to speculate and say, well, he could have tased them and then done them harm, we don't see any evidence of that. So therefore, I can't jump in on that camp that says it was a deadly weapon, because I think it clearly wasn't. So Fulton County District Attorney Paul Howard says once Mr. Brooks was shot, there is Atlanta policy that requires that officers have to provide timely medical attention, but he was shot for 2 minutes and 12 seconds. There was no medical attention applied to Mr. Brooks. So that's according to Paul Howard. I have not dissected the timeline that well, but it is something I'm going to look forward to, because I did see some body cam footage of the officers actually doing something with him, trying to roll him around. I heard one officer say, hey, breathe, Mr. Brooks, breathe, because they knew that he was dying. And I think it was actually the same cop who shot him who knew that he was going to die as a result of his bullets. He's saying, keep breathing, because he knew he should not have pulled the trigger on that. He also says what we discovered is during the 2 minutes and 12 seconds that Officer Rolfe, that he was on the ground, Officer Rolfe kicked Mr. Brooks while he laid on the ground fighting for his life. The other officer, Officer Brosnan, stood on Mr. Brooks' shoulders while he was there struggling for his life. And Paul Howard concludes, based on the way these officers conducted themselves, that the demeanor immediately after the shooting did not reflect any fear or danger, but reflected other kinds of emotions. And I totally agree with that. Totally agree with that. I don't see any reason why they would be fearful. I can see, so there's a point when this is all going on when I think it goes from a justified shooting to a non-justified shooting. And that point really is when Rayshard starts running away. When they're still in the middle of the altercation, when they're on top of each other, if one of the cops would have pulled out a gun and shot him in that time span, I would have agreed it was a justified shooting. But when a man is running away, literally running away, you can't justify that anymore. It's just not, it's not justifiable. And we're going to talk about some case law and some rules that show you that. So here is an actual video that, or an actual image that Miss Faith found, which this is the first time I've actually seen this. She just slipped this in here, very sly. Here is Officer Rolfe kicking Brooks. And that looks like a kick to me. That looks like a pretty hard kick. Pretty hard right there. You know, normally when I first heard that he kicked him, I thought maybe he just kind of nudged him, you know, nudged his arms, like kicked his arms up to see if he, you know, had a weapon, to kind of do a scene assessment. And doesn't look like that at all to me. This looks like somebody is just gearing up to kick a field goal. And of course, that is not appropriate for somebody that you just shot and who is dying on the road. Not okay. All right. So what about some of the people who say there is no obligation, there is no duty to retreat, or there is no, you know, the cops had every right, they had every authority to kill him or to shoot at him because of this altercation that took place. And what I think is happening is people are sort of getting confused between what happens in your home and what happens out in the public. So let's say, for example, that these cops weren't cops. Let's say that this was just you or I out in the middle of a street fight. We get into a street fight. This happens. We're wrestling with somebody. If we're in the middle of it, if he is hitting us, if he is on top of us, if we're physically facing imminent threat or imminent danger, you can pull out a gun and shoot that person. But when they are fleeing away from you, if you shoot that person in the back, you're going to get charged for murder for that. No question. Almost in every single state, at least in my state. It's very common. This is actually something that we talk about in law school. It's called the Castle Doctrine. And we typically talk about this in the context of home ownership. So if you're in your home, which is your castle, and somebody is breaking into your home, you have a right to protect your home. You have a right to protect your life, your liberty, your family, even your property if in certain situations. But if somebody's coming in and they're an immediate threat, you have a right to fire a gun and shoot them. You're protecting yourself. It's your home. It's your castle. When people are breaking in, you don't know. You don't know whether they're just going to come and steal property. You don't know if they're in the wrong house. You don't know if they're coming to kill you and rape your family. You have no idea. So the law says in that type of situation, we have a lot of protection. It's called the Castle Doctrine. Okay, this is something that we talk about. You can Google it. And it really is a common law doctrine. It states that it states specifically that people have no duty to retreat in your home. So if somebody comes in, you don't have to run away. You don't have to leave. You can use you can use reasonable force that happens to be deadly. You can do that in your home. However, if you're outside of the home, then you have a duty to retreat. If you're in a fight and one person retreats, the other person also has to retreat. You've got an obligation to break it up. If you're in the middle of a fight and one person runs away, you don't get to go chase that person down. That's not what we want. The law wants to incentivize people to break things up. We want to protect life. We don't want to give people the opportunity to have one person start a fight. Let's say person A gets into a fight with person B. Person A starts it. Person B pops person A and it almost ends it. Okay? Because person A goes, "Oh man, I'm way outmatched here. I can't survive this." Person A starts running away. Well, if person B should say, "Well, A started it. Now I'm going to go finish it. Now I'm going to go chase A down and beat the heck out of him and break his head and give him what he actually deserves." The law doesn't want that to happen, which is what happened with this case, with this officer. The fight started. The fight had basically ended. The officer was was getting back to his feet. He was not substantially injured. There's another body cam video. I don't think we clipped it. He's talking about, some blood on his elbow, but he doesn't even know if it's his blood. It may be Rayshard's blood. So he's fine. He gets back up, but emotionally, he's defeated. He's been devastated, and he needs to get his revenge. And so based on his emotional response and his emotional reaction, he pulls out his gun, fires 3 shots, and kills Rayshard, which of course would be outside of that castle doctrine type of theory. The castle doctrine doesn't apply in this particular case because we're not talking about a home, but it's illustrative. If you're in a home, we give you certain protections. If you're in the middle of the public, you don't get those same protections. If somebody attacks you and flees, you got an obligation to also leave it be. You don't get to go chase that person down and execute them because they hit you or they hurt your frail egos. So that is the response to the claim that they had an obligation, or they had the ability, the lawful authority to end the fight by firing the bullets back. Once he was gone, once this engagement had de-escalated to a certain point, they had no more authority to find him or to shoot him. The next big question that I get, or I've seen actually a lot, is that people are pointing back to Rayshard Brooks' criminal history. So he does have a substantial criminal history. No question about it. Let's take a look. Here's what it looks like. So he's got false imprisonment. He's got simple battery. It looks like as a family, maybe the V stands for domestic violence, false imprisonment, simple battery, felony cruelty, felony imprisonment, theft, interfering or obstruction with an officer, more felony cruelty, more obstructing an officer, more false imprisonment, and so on and so forth. A guy I follow on Instagram, Mike Cernovich, said Rayshard's criminal history includes multiple violent felonies. He says the media isn't reporting on this. This explains why the police call for backup. Man, oh man, they left out some pretty huge details out of this story, which is sort of a common theme I'm seeing from people. What does his criminal history have to do with anything that happened on that one particular night? He was still running away. He still didn't have a deadly weapon. He can have a rap sheet extremely long. He does have a history of being difficult with officers. I'd be very curious to know if these officers knew that, if they identified him, if they pulled that up, if they knew that, hey, this guy has a long history of dealing with officers poorly. Maybe we should be a little bit smarter about this. Maybe we should wait until we get 4 or 5 more officers around him. Don't know if that happened. Totally speculating on that point. But the point of it is, what ends up happening is people look at these past records, and all they're doing is saying that the past prior activity is indicative that he's going to commit another crime. And we can't do that. That's really just mind reading. You don't know if he was just going to run away, which he could have. But many people say, well, he had the taser. He could have turned around and just killed. He could have killed those guys. He could have incapacitated them and then killed them, which is speculation. It's totally mind reading. It's using a fortune teller ball to sort of try to predict the future, and you can't do that. Or if you do, if you want to be intellectually honest, if you want to play that game, you have to also play the game that he could have just run away. He could have just been throwing the taser back and not hit or fired or done anything, and he could have just kept on running. And honestly, the police, they've got helicopters. They've got 25 other units in the square mile. They would have picked him up in 30 seconds. Okay, 3 minutes. They would have picked him up. He's not going to get away. They would have found him. They would have captured him. They knew who he was. They had his car there. They had his identification. They could have issued a warrant. There's a million different things that they could have done. But the officer, unfortunately, had his ego hurt, and he just got bested. So that required that he respond in kind. Just like I threw a controller at my little brother, he just decided to pull his gun out and get his revenge. He got bested on a man-to-man type of a situation, and so he was going to use unequal means to then rectify the balance. Oh, you want to fight with cops? How about this? And that's what led to him pulling the trigger. As the county attorney, as the district attorney said, they were operating based on emotion, not based on training. So if we're talking about Rayshard's criminal history, right? Everybody loves to talk about that. Everybody who says the cops were justified, they love to talk about that. Well, he's a criminal. Therefore, he should have been shot. What about the officer? What about Mr. Garret Rolfe, who had multiple prior citizen complaints against him? He was previously reprimanded for the use of force. According to the Atlanta Police Department records, his disciplinary history listed 12 different incidents, 12, including 4 citizen complaints, 5 vehicle accidents, and firearm discharge over his 7 years with the department. So again, if you want to be intellectually honest, if you want to say that Rayshard Brooks was predisposed, this was somebody who is preconditioned to commit violent offenses, and therefore we had to act in counteracting his propensity for violence. What about with Garret Rolfe, the cop? I mean, this was a guy who had a long history of misconduct. 4 citizen complaints, 5 vehicle accidents, fire discharge, multiple use of force complaints. He was previously reprimanded. So what the hell is this guy doing on the force to begin with? Why is he even on there? Why was he not booted out a long time ago when this stuff was taking place? Is that going to get fixed? Is that going to be addressed? Well, we have the president's executive order that just came out yesterday, and we're going to see how that gets addressed here shortly. And so I just wanted to re-highlight that, this mind reading that we try to do, this fortune telling that people try to do, it's not predictive. A history of past crimes doesn't mean that somebody's going to go commit a new crime. They could have tased him. Rayshard could have tased them and taken their weapon and shot him, or he could have just run away. Could have just kept on running. He would have been picked up by the police shortly thereafter, and he would still be alive today. My understanding is that he had, I think, 3 daughters. I think he had just celebrated their daughter's birthday that day, and now he's dead. His widow has said that she's afraid that she's going to become a statistic because now she's another single black woman raising 4 children on her own. And it's a real sad thing. So the question is, are there any better solutions? Was Rayshard Brooks in the wrong, or are there better solutions? And this one's a tricky one, right? Because certainly the facts, according to what I've just presented, show that there was really no deadly weapon. There was really no immediate threat of serious bodily harm. The cop's response sounded like it was based on emotion. We saw a picture of the officer who actually even kicked him after he was down. Very angry, just got whooped by a guy. You have to be professional. You have to be a pro. These cops are supposed to be pros. They're not supposed to be shooting people because they're emotionally hurt, because their fragile egos have been impacted. Are there better solutions? Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've covered a lot of them on here, but the fundamental concern that I have here is we need better trained police officers. We need more mental health screening for police officers. They need to respond, not react to these situations. Respond, not react. These guys reacted and they killed a man, and they're going to have to face the consequences as a result of it. Maybe we could do something different for these types of situations. Maybe Rayshard Brooks, somebody with a long criminal history, maybe he's got some other issues that society can help him with. Rather than just sending him back to prison, sending him back to jail. One of the reasons why I speculate why he fled is because he was on probation. If he got charged with a DUI, he'd be in violation of probation. They were going to send him back to prison, and he's going to be away from his family. Again, right back in the cycle. So every time this guy gets out of the cycle, something happens, he goes back into the cycle. It's this flywheel. It's just this round and around we go. As soon as you hit the criminal justice system, a lot of your options in the world disappear. You lose a lot of rights. You lose rights to vote, for firearms, right to certain federal benefits. Many people don't want to hire you. Many people don't want to give you a place to live because you're a felon. And so we are trying to punish people for circumstances that they have not been able to get themselves out of. So why are we trying to punish people who are full of pain? You cannot punish the pain out of people. And this guy was just trying to get some food and go home. Sounded like a nice enough guy to me. And he was, what if an alternative solution would have been, man, maybe there's somebody you can talk to about your drinking, about your alcoholism. Maybe it's a substance abuse problem. Maybe he's got underlying trauma. My point is, he's a human being, just like you or I. That could have been your brother. That could have been your son. That could have been your father. That could have been your husband. And what we saw happen was a murder as a result of a bad situation. Are there better solutions that we can use to help him? Maybe we can send, social workers. Maybe we can send Alcoholics Anonymous. There are people who would be willing to talk to him and help him through this to break the cycle. We want to break the cycle. We don't want to continue to do this stuff. And I think this is what people are wondering. Is a DUI stop, was this situation worth a dead guy for a DUI? The counter argument, of course, is always, well, he's going to kill somebody, or he was going to do this, and I get that. But the point is, we want to help people. How do we help more people? Rather than just arresting them and throwing them in handcuffs and saying, you're just a bad person, you're a criminal, nobody even cares about you. We're just going to throw you in the jails and just throw away the key. Good luck to you. And when you get out, we're going to make it really difficult also. You can't vote. You're not a part of society. You don't get a job. You don't get housing. You don't get any of these federal benefits, student loans and those types of things. They're all gone. You can't improve yourself. You're stuck in the bottom of this hole, which is what this guy was. He was stuck. There are bad people who just like to break the law and break the law. But this guy had a family. This guy had daughters. This guy was, celebrating his daughter's birthday that day. There's a lot more to it. So how about we review these situations with just a little bit more humanity rather than just saying everybody deserves what they get? I am all for accountability. I'm all for responsibility. I'm all for law abiding. I want people to abide by the laws. But let's introduce a little bit more humanity into what we're doing. That's what I think people really want to see. We can talk about all the solutions in the world. We can end qualified immunity. We can do national databases. We can end police unions. We can demand body cameras on every single cop. But just a little bit more humanity in these things. I mean, they just process people like numbers, just like a case file, like a manila folder with a number on it. And we're more than that. All of us. You are more than that. I'm more than that. Rayshard was more than that. These cops are more than that. They're more than just, out there trying. They shouldn't be executing people like that. Why are they trained this way? Why do they think this way? Who gave them a gun and a badge and said, you can do this for 7 years. You've got 12 complaints on your record. That's all right. Just get right back out there and continue to do what you're doing. That's what needs to change. That's what people are saying. Defund the police and end reform our justice system. That's what we want. More humanity, more compassion, more empathy. Let's help people with their addiction. Let's help people with their underlying trauma. Because if we don't do it, we're going to see the same stuff over and over again. He's going to get arrested. He's going to go do some time. He's going to get back out. He's going to have even less options and less time than before. And he's going to be cornered in a way that that you and I have never experienced. We don't know what that's like. So when he's under arrest, the system has caused him to be so fearful of all of this crap that he's already been through that he just runs away. And the cops shoot him in the back as a result of it. It's an absolute tragedy. It's something that I don't have a lot of sympathy for what Rayshard Brooks did. It's not a good idea to fight back with the police. It's not good. His action was not a good thing, right? You should not fight back. You should not swing at them. This stuff is happen. This stuff can happen, unfortunately, and he had to pay the consequence for that. But just because I don't have sympathy for his actions doesn't mean that I don't have sympathy for the man, for his family, for the system, for what we're trying to accomplish by helping good people get their lives back on track. I believe that most people are born good and they face trauma and they face hardship in life, and that leads them to act a certain way. What if we dealt with the underlying trauma? What if we dealt with the underlying inequities in that person's life? And I'm not saying we, give everybody everything, but what if we just rethought the way that we enforce justice? This wasn't a violent crime. It turned into a violent situation because the police were arresting somebody for DUI. What if we just said, we're going to put you in a treatment program. We're going to give you some tools to deal with your alcoholism. Why are you drinking? Are you upset about this, upset about that? What is the underlying thing that is causing you to self-medicate through drugs and alcohol? Let's just rethink the paradigm of what our criminal justice system looks like, and maybe we won't have so much of these totally unjustified killings. Now, it is time to talk about, of course, the next topic that we have, which is the executive order from President Donald Trump. So yesterday, on Wednesday, June 16th, Donald Trump released a new executive order. It's called a presidential action, and it is regarding safe policing for safe communities, issued on June 16th. Now, I read this late last night, and what I did is I highlighted I read the entire executive order. It's not long. It's about 5 pages. And I want to run through it with you. I want to highlight what I like, highlight what I dislike. So the good stuff is in green. The bad stuff is in red. And the meh stuff, the kind of middle of the road stuff, that's going to all be in yellow. And so here's what we've got. Let's take a look at this order. And I'll just, the Cliff Notes version of this, I think this is a great step in the right direction. I am very actually pleased with what I saw. And we're going to run through it. So as we know, the main part of any executive order is going to start with the purpose. And here, that's what we're talking about right here. The purpose is, as Americans, we have to establish a reason why we are doing this. Why are we even doing the executive order part? And so what this executive order does is it really spends a little bit of time fluffing up the police. And it's doing that for a purpose, because it's about to blast the police. It's going to build them up, say, we love you, you're great, we're issuing this to serve a purpose. By the way, we think you're great, but we're gonna have some serious reforms. So here's what that looks like. So federal, all right. So my clicky thing is not working. So the federal, state, and territorial law enforcement officers place their lives at risk every day to ensure these rights are preserved. So they're talking about fundamental, inalienable rights to life, liberty, and they're saying that the cops are the ones who are responsible for ensuring that this takes place every day. The rest of this, same stuff. Right? I have a strong disagreement about this part here. You know, are they really putting their lives at risk every day? Not really. I mean, you know, some of them are, but a lot of them are not. A lot of them are writing traffic tickets and things. And yes, I understand that a traffic situation can go bad, but we've already talked about this a lot. Being a police officer is like the 16th or the 25th or whatever, dangerous job in America. There are many, many other dangerous jobs. And so this repetition that law enforcement officials are putting their lives on the line every day when they're writing people speeding tickets for going 11 over the speed limit is a joke. It's just a joke. Like, that's not putting your life on the line. Okay, if somebody pulls a gun out, one rare situation that is, but that could happen to anybody. All right, so law enforcement officers provide the essential, all this stuff. It's really fluffing them up. This is really where it changes. And he says they can help foster a safe environment where we all can prosper. Unfortunately, there have been instances in which some officers have misused their authority, challenging the trust of the American people with tragic consequences. So when I first read this, I thought, wow. And you can see my notes there. I actually say, wow. I wrote that specifically because he could have used when I say he, I'm talking about the administration, could have used much softer language. Easily could have been something like, we understand that these difficult situations arise and we need to continue to earn the trust of the American people. But he didn't do that. He could have said, we know these are difficult times, and therefore, in an effort to always improve our justice system, we're recommending these reforms. He's not saying that at all. It's not delicate language. And when you read these types of governmental orders, sometimes a small word that has a little bit of a connotation, like the word misused, in everyday parlance, that may not mean much to you or I, right? We say, well, I misused that, or I misplaced that, or something. It's kind of a small deal. But when you use it in these government documents, it's a pretty big deal. They're not going to come out there and say some officers have been psychotic maniacs with their authority, which, if you ask me that, I'd say, yeah, that's pretty accurate. There are some of these guys who are psychotic maniacs. That would be very colorful, very sort of inflammatory language. So you're not going to see that type of language in government documents. It's going to be mostly couched, mostly quiet, kind of benevolent language. But here, they're saying specifically, no. They misused their authority. They challenged the trust of the American people, and they did so with tragic consequences for individual victims, their community, and our nation, which is a big deal. He could have easily not said anything about fault, but he's assigning fault right there. The administration is saying, yeah, the cops are wrong. They misused their authority. They did it, and they challenged the trust, and it resulted in tragic consequences. So he's blaming law enforcement directly on that, and I've never seen anything like that in my time in practice coming from that level, which is a big deal. And I think a lot of people are glossing over that. He goes on forward to say, we're all entitled to live according to with confidence in our law enforcement officers, and he specifically calls out the African American community. He says, particularly in the African American communities, we must redouble our efforts as a nation to swiftly address the instances of misconduct. So I highlighted that. What does that mean? We don't know exactly, but we're going to get to it soon. But the fact that he specifically said, yeah, law enforcement's a problem. And guys, law enforcement is a problem with the African American community in particular, and we're going to fix that. It's a really focused argument. It's a really focused purpose. The document is opening up saying we are going to address these issues. We know the cops are wrong. We know the cops are wrong specifically with the African American community. So it's on point. I mean, I don't know how you get much more on point than answering those two things. It's the purpose, I think, is pretty clear. Just because I like the purpose doesn't mean I like all of this, but it's starting out pretty good. And the order goes on to say even further that the Constitution declares and so on, establish justice. Then we end the purpose part of the argument. Now, he goes into what he's calling, the administration is calling these independent credentialing bodies. So they're talking about creating these ICBs that can help law enforcement be held accountable. So they're saying a couple things. One, law enforcement agencies must constantly assess and improve their practices, but they can accelerate these assessments by doing these other things. So here's how these types of orders work. This is a quick refresher on federalism. So in the United States, we kind of have two parallel operations of government. We've got the federal government and you have your state local government. The federal government does certain things. The rest of the powers that are not enumerated are they're back down to the states. So the states have a lot of rights, which means that the federal government can't come in and tell your state how to run their law enforcement agency. They can't do it. The Trump administration can't come into Arizona or into Scottsdale and say, Scottsdale PD, you need to do this. They can't do it. It's a separation of powers thing. But what they can do is they can provide incentives for the Scottsdale Police Department to get into compliance with what the federal administration works. They can create incentives to do that. They can't mandate it, but they can say, we're going to give you a bunch of money if you do things the way that we ask you to do it. They have the power of the purse is what we call it. They've got the purse. They've got the checkbook. They can set rules and say, if you want some of this money, you got to do things our way. And so when we see that in this executive order, that's what this paragraph is fleshing out. The state and local agencies must do it, but they can accelerate these things by playing ball here. So they're trying to establish these ICBs, these independent credentialing bodies that can address and correct these deficiencies within these local law enforcement agencies, and they're going to try to do it in a proactive manner. So they're going to try to identify and correct the problems before they become problems. And that's the section that is creating these bodies. Now, as I explained previously, this paragraph B here is saying if you play ball, you get money. So as long as you get certified by the Attorney General, then they will go ahead and give you some money. And as long as you comply with these standards. All right, so then now what are we talking about? Now what are we talking about specifically when we're talking about getting credentialed by the Attorney General? So here is what they are looking for. And I've got different colors, different highlights here. And so here we've got the independent credentialing bodies. This is what they're looking for. Policies and training regarding the use of force and de-escalation techniques. So the Department of Justice is going to say, Mr. Mrs. Law Enforcement Agency in small podunk town in the middle of anywhere, you're doing things a certain way. We're going to ask you to do things a different way. If you do things our way, we're going to give you funding to do that. Here's how we want you to do things. You need policies and training regarding use of force and de-escalation techniques. Now, the reason I put that in red is because I don't know what that even means, and I think it's stupid. I think it's lame. I don't know I don't know what this is going to do to solve any of these problems. I don't know what de-escalation techniques or use of force training would have done for Officer Rolfe in the Rayshard case. I don't know what it would have done for Derek Chauvin in the George Floyd case. Would it have done anything for the Breonna Taylor case if these guys knew more about the rules or they knew more about de-escalation? Would it have changed the outcome in any of those things? I don't think so at all. I mean, I don't even know how you make a good argument for that, other than they would not have started to engage in those conflicts. If that's what that means, if that means that they're not going to enforce stupid things or get into those types of situations to begin with, then that's great. But I don't think that's the real problem. The real problem is not de-escalation. The real problem is that these cops want escalation. They want to get out there and get rowdy. They want that adrenaline rush. They want to get out there and smash things and break things. Where de-escalation would be helpful, it would be in identifying personalities that are de-escalation oriented. And it's saying if you are an officer and you haven't gone through a mental health screening, or we've identified that you are somebody who likes to break things, you don't get to be a cop. But that's not what this is saying. This is saying that they're just going to do more training is the answer. More training. More training's going to solve the problem. I don't think so. I think this is a more fundamental problem. I don't think it's the cops that they don't know what to do. I just think it's they're predisposed to do the wrong thing. Not because of a lack of training, but because it's a personality type. It's a mental issue. It's the wrong people on the force. People who are predisposed to getting in these conflicts. So I wasn't really happy with that. I thought it was kind of dumb, throwaway language. I don't even know what that means. More policies and training for de-escalation. All right, it's fine. All right, the next thing they talk about, performance management tools such as early warning systems that help identify officers who may require intervention. Intervention is a good one. I would love to see that. So I do think that would solve these problems. With Derek Chauvin, he had a long history. He had other problems. I think we've got a slide in here. He had 17 or something different prior offenses, 16 complaints during his 19-year career, only 2 of which were closed with discipline. Chauvin was a senior officer and a training officer. So basically, these guys are skating around under the radar with all of these complaints, with all of these issues. If we could identify them, or even in the Rayshard Brooks case, if we were able to identify that Officer Rolfe had all of those prior complaints, which I've already spoken about previously, 6, 7 complaints, 14 complaints over his 7-year tenure, if we could have identified those and said, this guy is a problem, we got to get him off the force, or we got to put him behind a desk. Somebody take away his gun. Somebody take away his badge and sit him aside. I love the idea. I love that. We want to identify these people. We want to use good data. We want to know which ones are going to be the ones causing most of the problems, because I do think it's a smaller minority of officers who are causing most of the problems. So if we can identify them and boot them out of the system, great. Let's do that. Now, we have other problems there, right? It's a small minority of officers who are causing most of the problems, but the other officers, the majority of the officers, cover for the minority. It's all part of the blue shield. They're all protecting one another. That's a problem that this does not address. It does not address them protecting each other and covering up the other malfeasance. If they continue to do that, these early warning systems are no good. How can you receive an early warning about something bad an officer did if there's no evidence that the officer did something bad? You can't. So it's a great idea. But what about self-reporting? Who's in charge of this? Who's going to manage the data? What goes on that list? What are we talking about specifically? And I think it's why I said it's a step in the right direction, certainly. And then, of course, the third main part that they want to see are practices regarding community engagement. And again, this is one of those things that I really like the idea and concept. I really don't know what it means, though. Community engagement is such a broad term. It's colorful language. It sounds good. Yeah, I want community. Who doesn't want community engagement? Everybody wants that. What the hell does that mean? I don't know what it means. Is it more of these conversations back and forth? Anyways, we're going to get there, but I really don't know what it means, which is why it is in yellow, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. All right. So now we say that the this is what the order goes on to say. Use of force policies have to be at minimum in accordance with all of the local laws. This is a big one. So I've seen some disparity here. I've seen some arguments on Twitter. So this is the chokehold portion of the executive order. State or local law enforcement use of force policies prohibit the use of chokeholds in a physical maneuver that restricts an individual's ability to breathe for the purposes of incapacitation, except in those situations where the use of deadly force is allowed by law. All right, so let's break this one down a little bit because I've got a lot of opinions on this chokehold thing. Now, I put it in green because I do like the idea that law enforcement is getting more training, more expertise around this one particular move of the chokehold. And you saw here in this executive order, they're talking about a chokehold that reduces an individual's ability to breathe for the purposes of incapacitation. Okay, so there's two types of things that really can happen when you are choking somebody. And they're two very distinct things, right? On the one hand, you can choke somebody and you can be impinging on their air pipe, and it's going to cause that to collapse, and they are going to suffocate. They cannot breathe because there's so much pressure here that they can't get any air into their lungs, down through their trachea, in through their mouth, through their trachea, into their lungs. That's one way that you can choke somebody and kill somebody. It's very dangerous to do it that way. But there is another type of chokehold or neck restraint, and it doesn't have the same level of danger. It's just a regular sort of a chokehold. We do this in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. You've seen it in the UFC. You know what this feels like, many of you. It's not that big of a deal, right? It's a chokehold where basically somebody's neck is coming in right here in the V of your arm, and you're locking it up, and you're flexing a little bit to give it a little, and all that's happening is that the arm is impinging here on your two veins that supply blood up into your brain. And you respond to that very quickly, right? I've been choked out many, many times, and I'm still alive. I'm still kicking. And so in my opinion, I don't think that is necessary to remove from law enforcement's arsenal. I don't think that it is. And here's why. It's just a matter of practicality, right? I have probably been choked out or close to being choked out. Maybe, I was doing the math this morning in preparation for this show, maybe 700 to 800 times. Okay, I wrestled and I did mixed martial arts for about 6 years. And I was doing the math, and I said, okay, if I get choked out about once every practice session, and I was going to practice sessions about 5 days a week for about 6 years, probably in the ballpark of 500 to 800 times, I've had somebody else's arms around my neck to choke me out. Easily in that ballpark. A lot. Okay, and I've done it to a lot of people. And I've never killed anybody, and nobody's ever killed me, because it is done in the mechanism of sort of sport. People will say, of course, when I'm talking about this, that's outrageous. These cops, these cops are in a life and death situation, and when they're using one of these techniques, they're doing it to kill or incapacitate somebody, and they're going to have their arguments for it. Here's my point: there are 5 and 6 year olds around the country who are doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and mixed martial arts of all varieties, who are going to learn how to do chokeholds, how to respond to chokeholds, and how to effectively use them without killing somebody. It's a valuable tool. It's very, very difficult to incapacitate somebody or respond in a physical fight without getting their neck or their head. Let's go back to any one of the situations that we were in. If the cops are trying to tackle somebody, you have to grab the head, you have to grab the neck, you have to. You can't grab an arm. You take an arm, you go into an arm bar, and you break their arm. That person has their other hand free, they've got their legs free, they've got their head free, they can bite, they can pull something out. They're not thinking about what's happening to their arm because they're thinking about fighting you. But when you have somebody's neck and you're cutting off the blood to their head, they respond. They drop everything, they latch up right here, and they are going to be focused on not passing out. It's just it's a natural human reaction. So law enforcement can absolutely do that without killing people. They definitely need better training for that. They definitely need more resources, and they need to know how to do it. But just because we're talking about, wrapping yourself up around somebody else's neck doesn't mean you're going to kill that person. So the executive order goes very clearly to say, restricting an individual's ability to breathe. So we're not talking about the trachea chokehold. We're talking about the trachea chokehold's off limits if you're going to be a part of the executive order. But the other chokehold, by my reading of this, is not. So law enforcement can still use the chokehold that just cuts off the blood and makes you pass out. Soon as the blood goes back to your brain, you're back in business. You're right back up, no problem at all. And it's something that I think is a reasonable tool for law enforcement. I actually think it's safer than pulling that one out. There's been a lot of criticism on Twitter, people saying this executive order doesn't go far enough because it only impacts the trachea chokehold. It doesn't impact the blood type of chokehold. And they want more. They want it to ban all chokeholds. And I just disagree with that. I've been choked out many times. I've choked out many, many people. It's not that big of a deal. And I think it's safer. If you take that tool out of law enforcement arsenal, I think you're going to have more shootings. I think a cop is not going to be able to respond. If they can't grab somebody's neck and take them down to the ground, if they're just fighting on limbs, if they're trying to do takedowns, if they're trying to punch somebody into the point of submission. I mean, if you can't choke somebody out, what are you going to do? You're either going to shoot them, tase them, or beat them because you're out of options. There are no more options. So there's a lot of naysayers on Twitter who are saying, yeah, this doesn't go far enough. It should be all chokeholds. There should be no use of force and all that stuff. I just totally disagree. I've been choked out. I know it is a pretty safe maneuver. And if these cops could do it safely, I'm okay with that. I think it's actually going to cause them to use their weapons less, use their tasers less, injure people less, and it's a valuable tool to them. So then the other response to that is that law enforcement is not a sport. It's not that type of a situation. When you're in a battle in law enforcement, you're just out there to kill each other. Well, I can tell you this. I've wrestled many, many black belts. I've wrestled people who are far more talented than I am, and they never killed me or got even close to that. My point being that if you are somebody who is well-trained and well-practiced, you can get into a situation like that and you can totally control the situation without having to kill somebody. You know that you're operating on a higher plane. These cops are operating on a higher plane. They don't have to pull their guns out. They know that they've got better training. They've got self-defense training. They can do these things in a way that is not going to result in death or harm. But they do need some more training on that. And if they're not competent in that, they shouldn't be using them, and they should be behind a desk. And really, that's kind of across the board. Why are people who are not qualified to be doing any sort of police enforcement, why are they out on the streets? It's a big part of it. That's my rant on chokeholds. Okay, that's my rant. I'm not going to beat that up too much longer. Spend enough time on that. So back to the executive order. This part here is saying the third-party providers can be set up to help flesh out these independent credentialing boards. This is all good stuff. Now, I know this is a lot of text, but this is all good stuff. Information sharing. The Attorney General shall create a database that's going to collect all instances of excessive use of force related to law enforcement. So we're going to have this national database that's going to be housed by the Attorney General. We're going to know all about these instances of excessive force. It's great. It's a great start, as I mentioned. But what is also going to be include in the database? So the database is going to have terminations, records about terminations or decertifications, criminal convictions of law enforcement officers for on-duty conduct, civil judgments against law enforcement officers for improper use of force. So this would mean if a law enforcement officer, hurts somebody and they sue them civilly, that's going to get reported. And then the big one, yes, I'm so happy about this one, where a law enforcement officer resigns or retires while under active investigation related to the use of force. So I am very happy about that. This is something I've been railing about on this show for months now, that officers will resign or they will retire in lieu of being fired or terminated. And so I am very happy that this is being included. If an officer gets in trouble and then they resign, still going in the database. You don't get to do that. You don't get to bail out of the process. You did something wrong. The fact that you don't want to be an officer anymore is fine for now, but we're still going to record that in the database. You don't get to wait a couple years and come back. You don't get to go across the state border, go to the next state over, the next county over, and become an officer again. We have a record of all of this. Now, where I would like to see this go much further is with the use of force stuff. So we see here that we've got where a law enforcement officer resigns or retires while under investigation related to the use of force. I would really like to see all of this expanded. Not only the use of force, but other things, other improprieties. Where are they conducting other malfeasance? All of these problems should be documented somewhere. Like, for example, in Arizona, we had a DUI crime lab technician who was viewing body cameras from the arrest records of his ex-girlfriend. So he was dating a girl. She gets arrested for a DUI. He works for the police department in the crime lab. He unlawfully accesses those body camera records in violation of internal policy, watches her body cameras because he was curious. He had nothing to do with the arrest or the underlying charge or any of that stuff. He just saw her name come through and he's like, oh, hey, Brittany, I wonder what happened with her case. He goes and he checks it out. Totally in violation of the law, not allowed to do that, violation of policy and all that stuff. Shouldn't that be included in this? He didn't use any force here, but he absolutely broke protocol, and he did it with personal motivation and personal bias. So why is that not being included? So, as I said, I think this is a great first step. I'm hoping that expands. And if we can wiggle our way in, if we can help create this database, if we can start monitoring some things, hopefully the idea is we can start adding more things that we want to look at. All right. The Attorney General shall regularly and periodically make available public, aggregated, and anonymized data, which, of course, is super lame because it doesn't do anything for anybody other than provide some general data. Now, I do think there's going to be some interesting data in here. I would really like to see what this looks like. This may impact policy prescriptions, so we may take a look at this data and say, the problem is a lot worse than we thought. Or we may take a look at it and say, it's actually not a problem at all, according to the data. We just don't know yet. And because we don't have a national type of a system that is monitoring these things across the board. There's too much hiding in the dark. The law enforcement officers and police agencies are keeping things in the dark. The more stuff we can bring to light is great. But I still do think that this is super lame because defense attorneys need access to this data. We want to know who the officers are who got disciplined. We want to know, their names, where they came from, what they're doing, and anonymous data, aggregated data doesn't help us do any of that. This subsection here again, play ball, get money. And then this is the final part, which really I was very happy to see. Okay, we're talking about mental health, homelessness, and addiction. This is something I railed about previously when we were talking about Rayshard Brooks. There are many people in our society who are hurting, especially right now, especially after coronavirus and everything that's been going on in the world. They're hurting. They're self-medicating through addiction. They've got mental health problems. They're using substances, drugs, and alcohol to help heal something that's going on in their life. They're not necessarily, criminals in that they're out there recklessly trying to cause havoc in the world, but they're broken people. They've got problems that they're trying to work through and deal with. And unfortunately, what we're doing right now is we're dealing with a human type of problem with a military type of response. We're using law enforcement, which thinks that they're in the middle of Fallujah, in the middle of Iraq or Afghanistan. They're dealing with these people who have civilian, human being, empathetic problems. And there's a mismatch there. We don't need tasers, tanks, and guns and SWAT teams to deal with people who are just in pain because of something that's going on in their life. They need help. They need treatment. And to my tremendous surprise, that's included in this executive order. I had no idea it was going to be in there, but he talks about it specifically. As a society, we must take steps to safely, humanely care for those who suffer from mental illness and substance abuse in a manner that addresses needs. And we want to promote, he goes, it is the policy of the United States, this is so big, to promote the use of appropriate social services as the primary response to individuals who suffer from impaired health, mental health, homelessness, and addiction. Recognizing that because law enforcement encounters such individuals on a regular basis, they should be properly trained for such encounters. So that is so big. Read that there one more time. It is the policy of the United States to promote the use of appropriate social services as the primary response to individuals who suffer from impaired mental health, homelessness, and addiction. So think about that. What if Rayshard Brooks, we said, hey, this guy's actually probably an alcoholic, probably got a substance problem. Maybe we send social services out to deal with him. Maybe on the first one, we saw his criminal history. Maybe on the first one, rather than locking him up and imposing all of these penalties on somebody, maybe we help him get through whatever he's suffering through, and it doesn't cause the chain reaction. We don't see a snowball of additional criminality that take place, because once we throw somebody in the system, it's very difficult for them to get out of the system. So it is the policy of the United States to use the appropriate social services. And he used the word addiction on there. I have to tell you, we have represented many people. Many people are suffering from some form of an addiction. It's alcohol, it's sex, it's drugs, it's gambling, it's codependency, it's a number of different things. But they have a human problem that just needs some focus. We just have to help them through it a little bit. The fact that the president of the country, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, they're all saying we're going to use, it's the United States policy to use social services where appropriate rather than law enforcement, is a big deal. Very, very big deal. And I think a welcomed update. Now we're going to see where this goes, but is a great first start. The order goes on to say, the Attorney General shall, in consultation with Health and Human Services, they're going to identify opportunities to train law enforcement officers about mental health, homelessness, addiction. They're going to increase the capacity of social workers, and they're going to work on developing co-responder programs so that social workers and other mental health professionals can work alongside law enforcement officers to address the situations together. They are going to do these community support. They're going to survey community support models about these issues, mental health, homelessness, and addiction. They're going to come up with specific recommendations about it. Then they're going to talk about budgeting, implementing community support models, and getting this stuff in place. Then they're going to order that basically there's a new legislation that's going to be coming through over into Congress to enhance some of these tools. They're going to improve law enforcement practices, build community engagement. They're going to do all this stuff, right? They're going to do all this stuff. This all needs to go into the actual legislation that's going to be shot over to Congress. So, use of force policies, training, all of this stuff is going to be in the legislation. Again, use of force, I don't even know what that means. Retain high-performing law enforcement officers. This is something that I have been advocating a lot. Some people will ask, God, you must hate all cops, right? You want to defund all the police, like you hate them all. And the answer is no, I don't hate all police. I don't even think that every single one of them is a bad person. But we do have a lot of bad ones, and the ones who are silent about the bad ones are just as complicit in the problems that we see. They need to start policing themselves. How can we trust them to police us if they don't even police themselves? We can't. It's a total contradiction. If they can police us, meanwhile, they've got all these rampant problems within their own system. They don't even investigate their own people correctly. What the hell are they doing investigating us? They're riddled with problems. So we want more good officers. We want high-performing, high-quality, high-integrity, use of force. We want people to de-escalate. We want those people. We want more high-performing law enforcement officials, not the bad ones. So if we're gonna do that, other things have to change. The culture has to change. The blue shield has to change. The police unions have to change. The police unions are the big ones who want to keep the low-performing officers on board. Because if you threaten these performance reviews, if you threaten to bring out or to hold their records accountable, in Arizona we had police officers, their contract that their union negotiated said that their records would be destroyed after 5 years. It was a union deal. We'll give you the cops, we'll give you the workers, but you can't keep records on them, because then you're going to manage them, and then you're going to fire them, and we don't want any of that. So they are complicit in hiding all of the malfeasance that's going on. So we got to get rid of the unions. That's a separate topic, a separate issue. But confidential access to mental health services. They want law enforcement officers to go get mental health services. I completely agree with that. There needs to be more mental health services for these officers. And here's the deal. They said that it's confidential, right? And I support that. We want officers to go in and say, I'm having these thoughts. I'm having these visions. I'm getting very angry. I'm finding myself, every time I stop a black guy, I get very angry. They need to go talk to somebody about that. Great. Okay. Yeah. Go deal with that. You need to deal with that. but we need a system. There needs to be some accountability there also. What are we going to do to ensure that if an officer exhibits problematic personality or statements or whatever they're doing that is concerning, how do we make sure that we can make that known and make sure that they're no longer on the streets? So the way that it works, like for an attorney, say for example, we have certain privileges, we have certain protections. So there are certain things that if you came to our office and you told me, hey, Rob, I actually did punch that girl in the face. I did it. I'd say, okay, I can't tell anybody about that. You're protected by attorney-client privilege. Just like a cop here would be protected by doctor-patient privilege. It's called privilege. A doctor is not going to disclose anything that you tell that doctor unless something else supersedes that. Same with my example. If a client comes in and says, I punched her in the face, okay, I know you did. Sounds good. I'm going to keep that to myself. I'm still going to give you the best defense possible. We're going to work through this. If that same person came in and said, hey, Rob, I am going to go kill that person tomorrow. Well, I can't keep that secret anymore. That's no longer protected by that privilege because I've got a duty to go inform somebody that my client has a plan to go kill somebody. That person's life is more important than the privilege that exists between an attorney and a client. So we want to see something similar to that with law enforcement. Yeah, absolutely. We want confidential interaction. We want them to be forthcoming. We want them to be transparent and open and live in the sacred space of mental health services so that they can be vulnerable. They can say, yeah, I'm having these thoughts. Help me work through it, doctor. We want those types of people. But if they come through and a doctor says, this guy's a danger, this guy is somebody who is a hothead, and I've identified that, what do we do with that information? Is that going to be reported to somebody, or is it just going to stay confidential and sit in a doctor's black book somewhere? Because that is not a solution at all. It needs to be known. We need to know that these officers are not qualified. And so how does that work with health services? We are going to see. Again, these community outreach and listening sessions, I don't really know what that means or what that's going to do. I just don't know. I mean, I feel like we're having a lot of engagement. We have a lot of people protesting. We have a lot of property damage. We have protesters. We have rioters. We have a lot of people talking about these things, but I don't know what a listening session is. I just don't know what that means. Other than that, the rest of the order just goes through. You've got some disclaimers over here, and the rest of it, I think, is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, this was a big deal. I was really surprised to read this. When I started reading it, I was thinking it's going to be a big nothing burger. There's not going to be anything new in here that I kind of haven't heard about. I was very, very surprised to see the tone and the language that was used by this administration actually kind of siding against the cops. You guys misused your authority and you broke the trust of the American people, and there are going to be repercussions. I think a lot of the conservatives and the traditional Republicans were thinking that the Trump administration was going to come out and take the side of the cops, law and order and all those kind of catchphrases that he used during the campaign. And I just did not see that here. The other big surprise, of course, is the talk about addiction. The more we can talk about addiction and mental health across the board, the better for everybody. Right now, over the last 3 months, we were on lockdown. We were trying to avoid having a national epidemic, a pandemic, something that was going to, kill tons of people. While we were all doing that, while we were all on lockdown, while we were all disconnecting from other people and losing our jobs and losing our businesses and watching the world sort of melt down in front of our eyes, while we were dealing with a public health crisis, we were at the same time creating a mental health crisis. We were creating a new crisis in mental health. And I think in large part, a lot of what we're seeing around the country is a result of that. A lot of animosity, a lot of angst, a lot of energy that hasn't been dissipated for the last 3 months is now coming out into full fruition. And unfortunately, it is being exacerbated by law enforcement who is doing these things that are just inexcusable. Rayshard Brooks, inexcusable. George Floyd, inexcusable. Ahmaud Arbery, what the heck was that? Breonna Taylor, like these things are massive problems, and they are sparking a fuse that is just about to explode. It has already exploded throughout the country, throughout the world. And how do you fix that? Do you fix that by ending qualified immunity? Do you end that by ending police unions? No. It's a mental health problem. It is an addiction problem. And these are the resources that we need. Ultimately, I think that is where the solution needs to lie. We need more humanity, more empathy. We need more understanding of one another. We need to focus on mental health. We need to focus on addiction. If we can help solve those things, I think that's going to cover a lot of the reform that we want to see. Have the officers do officer things, have social workers do social workers things, and I think we'll be on a much better path. So that's the executive order from the administration. I'm happy with it. Honestly, I think it's a very positive thing. Some things absolutely need work. This is not the end of the solution. Until this ends up as legislation, it's passed by both houses of Congress, and it's signed into law by the president, whether that's President Trump or the next president. It's all fleeting. Another administration could come in and rescind this executive order, this presidential action. They could write their own. By the time I think the Democrats have a bill in the House, the Republicans have a bill in the Senate now, we're going to see what's in there. There's going to be a lot of people pulling in both directions. A lot of the cops, I can tell you this, they are not going to like this executive order at all. If we keep a database, a national database about all the terminations, all the decertifications, all the criminal convictions, all of the civil judgments, all of the improper use of force, whether they resign, whether they retire after they're under investigation, if we keep a record of that, that alone is going to, oh boy, we're going to see some seriously troubling things in that data, I think. But we got to see the data first. And so that is the president's administration, the Donald Trump's administrative order. Let's run over to the comments. We've got some serious comments here. My comment window is being very goofy right now, but let's take a look. All right, so a lot of comments from Lady Zaga. We've got a lot of comments from Bad Company. Let's run through them. Let's see. Don't know who this is. So Zulu Zite. Bobby D is getting a little long in the tooth, but he's had like 12 magnum opuses already. One more would be great. Sweet. Been censored. All right. So I want this channel to become required viewing, but dread the day when the live chat becomes chaotic. Oh, thank you, Zulu. Yeah, we're going to try to monitor that. We had an issue with a protester, and I didn't know, or not a protester. I had a commenter, a couple commenters, and I think Faith figured out how to eject those people, get them out of here, and I think we have that solved. So she's going to be on the ball with that. The FBI traumatized people on the reservation all the time. That comes from Lady Zaga. Yes. We got some people talking about some movies. Scorsese is the director. Mutiny. Lady Zaga. If you identify other law enforcement officials who have done something wrong, you become a snitch in their minds. Keep going and the cops will be shooting each other. Full-fledged mutiny within the ranks. Yeah, I think we're starting to see a little bit of that already. So in the Rayshard Brooks case, it looks like the officer who did not do the shooting has 100% turned on Officer Rolfe. And you can kind of see it in the video, actually. Because I forget the guy, Branson. The Officer Branson is up front, sort of following Rayshard first. Officer Rolfe is in the back. And Officer Rolfe fires his gun, and you look at Officer Benson, and he looks around like, bro, did you just shoot somebody? So I think he also agrees that it was unjustified, and he's totally flipped. He is now going to be helping the government prosecute Officer Rolfe, from my understanding. Law enforcement is not your problem. Your parents have their hands tied in raising you. That comes from Bad Company. It has to be centralized. Who's better? I disagree with the Attorney General doing the monitoring. That comes from Lady Zaga. Needs to be independent from the judicial system. I think that's a good A good point. Yeah, because the Attorney General, it's going to change with the administrations. It's really a political position across the board. But more accountability is trending right. It's directionally in the right direction, I think. So we're always open to refining the process because DAs are in-cop defenders and protesters. Really? Right there, got data. It's pretty easy. This is awesomeness. I'm learning a lot. Keep up the good work. Thank you. That comes from Obina IB. Same in Canada, except now they legalize weed. It's a slow day for jailers. Yeah, I know a lot of marijuana prosecutions that take place still in Arizona. Do you know in Arizona, possession of marijuana, which is legal in California, Colorado, other states, it is a felony here. So it's not a misdemeanor. So a misdemeanor is like a DUI, domestic violence. Possession of marijuana is a felony. It's one step up. You can go to prison for felonies. You go to jail for misdemeanors. You go to prison for felonies. Marijuana is still a felony in Arizona, unless you have your medical marijuana card, which I would recommend if you smoke. The Office of Independent Police Review Director, OIPRD, is responsible for receiving, managing, and overseeing all public complaints about municipal, regional, and provincial police in Ontario. Yeah, so a civilian oversight agency. Make sure that the public complaints about the police are dealt with in a manner that is transparent, effective, and fair to both the public and police. Yeah, and I am open to anything and everything in that manner. Anything that is more transparency, more accountability, more civilian type of leadership in law enforcement. This is what I don't get. These guys, every day is like they're going into a war zone. It's not a war zone. We're in the middle of Scottsdale right here. These other places, we all live in a pretty dang good place. And these guys don't need to be going out there like, acting like they're under attack in the Middle East. It's insane. Community. Yeah, this is a funny comment from Lady Zaga. It's having a meeting to decide if you should have meetings. Yeah, that's what it feels like. I don't even know what it means. Like, community conversations and stuff. Like we do the cops around Arizona, they have these things like coffee with a cop. Okay. I mean, I guess the idea is if a cop talks with a black person, they're going to know what it's like to be a black person, maybe something. And they're going to change their enforcement. They're going to have more empathy. I guess that's the idea. I'm for that. I don't have any problems with that. If people want to learn more about each other, I totally support that. I don't know that that's going to solve anything. I mean, I don't know that I can't imagine a cop sits down and says, I used to be a hot-headed, adrenaline junkie, smash things and break things type of officer. But now, having spoken with you, I don't want to do any of that stuff anymore. Actually, I'm going to change how I police, and I am going to be a community responder now. Like, is that going to happen? I don't think so. Can't see it happening, but, who knows? They can always walk it back after the election. You can call me cynical, but situationally convenient, palliative pandering is not an entirely unthinkable possibility with this administration. Yeah, and I agree with Zulu on that. Yeah, that's why I said, it's until this sucker's legislation, until we have it signed into law, passed by both houses, and signed off on by a president, and it becomes a law, which is then going to be subject to all sorts of interpretation from the judicial branch. But until that happens, it's fleeting. They could easily walk it back. Trump could change it. The Biden administration could change it easily, and right now, it all sounds good. It's a step in the right direction, but that could change it at any minute. And so that's what we have to cover here today. So I appreciate everybody who dropped the comments in. I am wondering what's going on with my comments. I may not be seeing all of your comments, but that's where we're going to leave it for today. It's a long show, had a lot to cover. All of the Rayshard Brooks stuff, all of the executive order stuff. It feels like, the weeks are just jam-packed with news on the criminal justice system, and how this all works and what the developments are going to be, what the solutions are going to be. So we're going to continue to cover it. We're going to be here next week, same time, same place. If you're watching and you have not already subscribed, please do so. It helps us out. I love to see you here. Thank you for being a part of the chat. It's so fun to have other people here and and actually not be speaking to myself. So that's super fun. Thanks for hopping in and making this fun and enjoyable for me, because it's important to me. It's important stuff to discuss. I have a big passion for it, and it's cool that other people do also. So we'll be back here same time next week. If you haven't already, get a copy of my book. You see it right back there. It's called Beginning to Winning. I just released it in June, and it's available on Amazon. If you go to Beginning to Winning, search for Beginning to Winning Gruler on Amazon. With my last name, Gruler. Just type the book name in, you'll see it. It really helps people who are charged with crimes. So it's if you're interested in light reading, it's not that. This is a how-to guide to help people get through the criminal justice system and put their lives back together. It's the 9-step framework that we use here at our law firm, and it's applicable to anybody, any case, any state, really probably any part of the world, to be true. But it's available on Amazon. I'd love your support. If you bought a copy or left me a great review, that'd be super cool. But otherwise, other than that, hope you enjoyed the show. Hope you learned something today. Hope this was a little bit valuable. And I look forward to seeing you again next week. Have a wonderful time and have a great evening. Bye-bye.